Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, witnesses.
This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format and is in public. We have witness testimony for 2 hours. For those in person, please follow the health and safety guidelines found on the cards on the table to prevent audio and feedback incidents. For the witnesses, you'll be seeing this yellow card go up, indicating now you have 1 minute left to speak. And when you see this side, I ask you to quickly complete your sentence so that we can move on. Le comité commence son étude de la protection aux résidents canadiens.
The committee is beginning its study on protecting Canadian residents from extreme weather events.
Viva Canada, Mrs. Susan Penwarden, who is virtual, Manager Director of Personal Lines, Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, Paul Kovacs, Founder and Executive Director, and Madame Sophie Guilbeault, Directrice des Partenariats. From Intact,
she's Director of Partnerships.
Mr. Blair Feltmat, Head Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. Chacun des témoins dispose de 5 minutes pour...
Each witness has 5 minutes to deliver the opening statements.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for inviting me today. I'm Susan Penwarden, Managing Director of Personal Insurance for Viva Canada, a national property and casualty insurer serving 2.5 million customers across auto, personal property, and commercial insurance. I'm also the outgoing chair of the Insurance Bureau of Canada's Natural Catastrophe Committee and the co-chair of the Resilient Homes Task Force at the ICLR. All to say, I see firsthand both the human and economic impact of extreme weather events on Canadians from coast to coast. As I'm sure your study will demonstrate, we must act now to protect Canadians and their assets from this ever-increasing risk. For our part, Canadian insurers continue to manage escalating claims volumes while funding community-level projects that support resilience. We share your commitment to protecting Canadians, but the scale of this challenge means we cannot do it alone. We must adopt a whole-of-society approach to solving this challenge. So what can the federal government do to support a resilient future for our nation? Number one, a shift in mindset. We must move away from reactive disaster recovery and toward proactive investment in risk reduction and resilience. Why? Because simply put, it makes economic sense. Last year, insured losses from severe weather ballooned to $9.2 billion, a shocking sum, and yet only a portion of the total economic impact. As our ICLR colleagues will highlight, we estimate that insured losses account for less than half of total economic cost of disasters. In contrast, investing in adaptation and resilience creates wide-reaching benefits for Canadians and the broader economy, from the mitigation of direct losses to the ability of local economies to recover quickly. Through investments in research centers like ICLR, our industry knows how homes can be built to withstand these threats. We've invested in putting that knowledge to the test right now with 2 pilots in southern Alberta in partnership with both the ICLR and Habitat for Humanity. With this knowledge, Canada could become a global leader in adaptation, but we need the federal government's help to scale what works. This means updating the National Building Code and ensuring adaptation is at the core of the new Build Canada Homes agency framework. It also means supporting the manufacture of resilient building materials to improve their supply, making necessary upgrades cheaper for Canadians while also generating economy-wide benefits. At a municipal level, it's equally urgent for all levels of government to work together to ensure critical infrastructure is upgraded to meet the demands of future weather conditions. This leads me to point number 2. We need to close the adaptation funding gap through better capital allocation. The $2 billion Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund was massively oversubscribed. For perspective, it's estimated that Toronto alone needs $26 billion in infrastructure improvements to withstand severe weather. We need to give adaptation the urgency it deserves. 3, we need to ensure that all Canadians have adequate protection against flooding, which is Canada's greatest climate-related risk. Today, there are more than 1.5 million homes, or 10% of the current housing stock, currently built in areas of high-risk flooding. These properties, in effect, are becoming uninsurable. This is why we must continue to work on a national flood insurance program that is complementary to the private industry and will provide protection for those high-risk homes. However, this has to be a sustainable solution over the long term. The program must also incorporate elements of adaptation to reduce risks over time, while also discouraging local governments from steering future development towards these high-risk areas. And finally, 4, our industry, alongside coalitions like Climate Proof Canada, are urging the federal government to create a national emergency management agency to improve coordination for disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. We were glad to see the federal government's recent launch of a new weather alert system. This is an important step towards helping Canadians to protect themselves. However, Canada remains the only G7 country without a dedicated national emergency management agency, which would greatly enhance national coordination, strengthen resilience, and reduce the financial toll of natural catastrophes. To close my remarks, I must emphasize again that severe weather impacts people directly, their communities, and also our economy. The scale of the threat in the future depends on what we do today. If we act now, with making meaningful investment in resilience as a national priority, scaling adoption of evidence-based solutions, and better coordinating national disaster recovery and preparedness response, then we not only protect Canadians today, we also shift the economic trajectory of our nation and transform risk into an opportunity. With your support, we are ready to work with you to make adaptation part of Canada's economic strength. I thank you.
Ben Warden, and the floor is yours, Mr. Kovacs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Paul Kovacs. I'm the founder and executive director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Sophie's going to lead for us, and then I'll follow with some advice.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Sophie Guilbeault, je suis directrice.
Good morning. My name is Sifu Gibble, and I'm Director of the Partnerships with the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction Institute, and I co-direct the Canadian Centre of Recovery and Resilience.
To build disaster-resilient communities, and we look forward to share our advice with you today. ICLR recently published a database tracking the history of societal, insured and uninsured losses from extreme weather damage. In 1994, Canada experienced $330 million in losses. Last year, we experienced $13 billion in damage, which includes $7 billion paid by insurance companies. Damage increased by 9.4% a year over several decades, which I'm sure you can agree is a trend that is very much unsustainable. The good news is that most of these $13 billion in losses last year are preventable. We know what to do. We know which locations in Canada are at high risk, and we know what are the 3 or 4 essential actions that can be taken to reduce the risk of severe damage to homes for different hazards. Often, these 3 or 4 actions can be accomplished under $15,000 per home. And we know that each dollar invested in resilience likely result to 5, 10, or more in terms of future avoided losses. If you can move to the next slide, I want to give some examples of how we know how to protect homes at risk. So this is from the floodings that happened in Montreal and Toronto last year. Insurance company paid $3.5 billion to 100,000 homeowners that had to clean up their basement from polluted water. And we know that on top of the uninsured claims, there was likely over $1 billion in damage to homes without insurance. Less than 10% of homes take preventative actions like putting in a backwater valve or a sump pump or having a landscaping that slopes the water away from their homes. Those are all measures that can be easily implemented and significantly reduce these costs. The other slide, if we can move to the next one, is from British Columbia. You can see here a house that was protected from wildfire by implementing things like a Class A fire-resistant roof, fire-resilient cladding, as well as a 1.5-meter non-combustible zone around the property, which stood up to the fire as opposed to the neighbor home who was completely destroyed. We've seen these cases in many communities in Canada when we did forensic investigations in Jasper, Kelowna, and all these places. And finally, the following slide is from Calgary last summer. If you can see at the top left picture, we have a roof that was previously rehabilitated with impact-resistant shingles following a hailstorm, and the other half was not. And you can see significant differences in damage. Similarly, if you look at the siding of the two homes next to each other, we see severe losses from wind-driven hail, with the one house on the right having vinyl siding that got severely impacted, and the one having impact-resistant siding on the left. So there are some good news in what we're sharing. We know how to reduce damage, but we must take actions like these to reduce these unsustainable trends.
Thank you, Sophie. We're rushing a little bit, trying to respect your time. I'm going to close with 3 recommendations. First, the Government of Canada should establish national building codes by 2030 to protect Canadian homes from flooding, wildfire, hail, and severe wind. Again, we know what to do. We just need to codify it, put it into the codes. Second of our 3 recommendations, Public Safety Canada should partner with the provincial and territory governments, with the insurance industry, and the focus should be, after a loss, we always build back better with resilience. After you experience a loss to your home or your community, the expectation always should be to build back better. The federal government's taken an important first step earlier this year with the modification of the disaster financial assistance arrangement. The need now is to coordinate the federal opportunity with provincial follow-through and collaborate with the insurance industry. And the third and final recommendation that we have today, as Susan started with, and we strongly agree, we need a coordinated approach to proactively encourage homeowners to implement the advice and changes that are needed. At the moment, the municipal governments and insurance companies have been bringing in a number of incentives in different communities in different ways. We do not yet have a national collaboration where the federal government, the provincial governments work with the others who benefit when a home is prepared, when a community is prepared. There are big savings that can be made. We think $1 can save 5 to 10. And at the moment, you've got municipal government stepping up to some extent. You've got insurance companies stepping up. We're looking for the federal and provincial governments to have this collaboration, this overall pre-event. Let's get homes ready. Let's do all these things that our science shows can be done. So to conclude, thank you for the opportunity. We want to share with you that there is a crisis going on in the United States where they have failed to deal with the same issue that's confronting us. In my opinion, we are not in crisis, but we're going the wrong way very fast. The losses are moving up, and we know what to do about it. In fact, the Americans didn't do it. It's not a good excuse. We need to get on doing the right things. We need to proactively invest in risk reduction. We need to take advantage after a loss. We need to put in building codes so we do this before any risk comes at all. We think this does not need to become a crisis, but unfortunately, we're going the wrong way fast. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Guilbeault. Thank you, Mr. Kovacs. And the floor is yours for 5 minutes, Mr. Feltmate.
Thank you very much. And my name is Dr. Blair Feltmate, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. I'm head of the NTAC Center on Climate Adaptation, which is housed within the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. I'm pleased to discuss the challenging topic of protecting Canadian residents from extreme weather events. More specifically, I'll zero in on how Canadians can protect themselves from residential basement flooding, which is the #1 cost of climate change in Canada, basements flooding, and I'll then turn to residential wildfire protection. As you will see, there is much that the federal government can do that is currently not being done to help homeowners help themselves to limit their exposure to the growing financial burden of flooding and wildfire. But before turning to these actions, let me just paint the picture of the formidability of the challenge we're facing in terms of insurance costs impacting Canada's housing market. I've shared a graph with you that you see on the screen that profiles insured losses for Canada from 1983 to the present. What matters most on this figure is the shape of the curve. It's bending upwards sharply, which means the costs of flooding and wildfires are getting worse faster. This is not where Canada wants to be. To go a bit further, as a result of growing extreme weather, 10% of Canada's housing stock, that's 1.5 million homes, is no longer insurable for flood risk. That's 1 in 10 homeowners who are unable to insure their biggest financial investment and their retirement plan, their home. No insurance is a problem for many, given the average cost of a flooded basement in this country right now is $54,000. In Quebec, in communities where flood risk exceeds 5% in a given year, Desjardins has stopped renewing mortgages. This trend will continue across Canada if we don't get ahead of the curve on adaptation. Over the past 12 years in Canada, for homes and communities impacted by catastrophic flooding, the resale value of homes dropped by 8%, which has changed the loan-to-value ratio on mortgages. Our group, the Intact Centre, will soon release a new report documenting that for homeowners living in flood-impacted neighbourhoods, we see spikes in the costs of medications to cope with mental stress, psychosocial stress, counseling services, and lost time for work. These are your constituents who are suffering. Turning to some wildfire facts, State Farm and Allstate have stopped writing home fire insurance in California and Arizona. Without fire insurance, you cannot secure a mortgage, which renders a home a stranded asset. In Canada, we need to understand, as Paul referenced, that we are not immune to a California-style situation. Now that we've covered the bad news, the depressing stuff, let's turn to some good news, starting with the return on investment associated with preparing homes for flooding and wildfire. Notably, $1 invested in adaptation produces in avoided losses per decade about $3 to $8. So what does adaptation look like for Canadian homeowners? This leads us to the infographics I've shared with you, starting with 3 steps to cost-effective home flood protection. In the interest of time, I'll leave similar infographics that focus on the community flood and wildfire protection for another day. The information presented on the infographic is based on input from the Standards Council of Canada, Canadian Red Cross, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and scores of subject matter experts. Along the top row of the infographic, you see steps that a homeowner can take to protect their home for $0 to lower their flood exposure. Actions can be as simple as checking that a sub pump works by adding water to a sump well and seeing if the pump turns on and pumps water outside. Most people find out that their sub pump doesn't work when they walk into 3 feet of sewer water in their basement. For a little bit more effort, a battery backup supply can be connected to a sub pump to keep it running in the event of an electricity outage that is very common during major precipitation events. Turning to wildfire risks, 3 steps to a cost-effective fire-smart home, the material I shared with you. You see that many simple actions can be taken to limit exposure to wildfire, such as removing shrubs from within a few meters of a house and replacing them with non-burnable material. These infographics, the ones I've shared with you, motivate homeowners to act, and this is the key point. Upon receiving infographics, within 6 months, 70% of homeowners take at least 2 actions to protect their home that they otherwise would not take. Currently, the infographics on flood and wildfire risk are being shared with customers of major Canadian banks, RBC and BMO, credit unions such as Meridian Credit Union, and property and casualty insurer customers and clients. Through these distribution channels, currently the infographics are being shared with about 3.5 million Canadian homeowners twice per year. The federal government could help Canadian homeowners to protect their homes by distributing flood and wildfire infographics on Government of Canada websites, Environment Climate Change Canada, Public Safety Canada, Housing and Infrastructure. I'll finish my last sentence. Canada's National Adaptation Strategy, published in 2023, stipulated that by 2025, 50% of Canadians have taken concrete actions to better prepare for and respond to climate change risk facing their households. The infographics I've shared offer a proven means to make this to meet this NSA, this National Adaptation Strategy target. Thank you,
Dr. Feltmate. And now we will start with the Conservative Party. For 6 minutes, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, and thank you for having me at committee today. I'm not a usual member. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll start with Ms. Penwarden. We're talking about creating financial or incentives for people to protect their own properties. I noticed that there was no recommendation to provide a tax credit for, mitigating fire or flood risk in homes. Is that something that you think would be useful in encouraging Canadians in high-risk areas to protect their homes?
I think anything we can do to help Canadians pay attention to this would be good. There are a number of actions and incentives provided, for example, at the municipal level at the moment, provided by the government. People can just access them freely. Our main challenge, if I'm honest, is actually making everyone aware of those things and then encouraging them to actually act. So there's an education and then action component that if they work together, I think we would see a bigger take-up. And so there's definitely options around that.
Kelowna this summer on a wildfire tour, and they had just done a Fire Smart where they were telling people to remove their juniper bushes next to their properties. And yet the local school was doing a fundraiser a week later selling people juniper bushes so they could plant them right next to their properties. So your thoughts on a tax credit for home renovations for putting sprinkler systems or flood mitigation systems? Any thoughts, Mr. Kovacs? Ms. Guilbeault?
On side, as Susan was touching on, any incentives are a good thing, anything that brings us an awareness. We've been promoting more coordination, so we'd like to see the federal governments coordinating with the provinces and the municipal governments and the insurance industry in a unified approach, but tax incentives can be a very helpful part of that.
I know there's been, over the past number of years, at least 5 years that I've been watching it, there's been a lot of talk about creating a national flood insurance policy. I mean, that doesn't cover all, but as you said, Dr. Feltmate, basement flooding is the largest insurable loss in Canada currently. Do you know where we're at on national flood insurance policy in this country?
Right now, it remains a work in progress. There's a group called Climate Proof Canada that is an assemblage of insurers and NGOs and academics that are looking at what would be the steps to be engaged to launch this program. But right now, I think it's sort of in a sort of sitting level status. It's not moving forward or backwards at the moment, I don't think.
Okay, Mr. Kovacs, or
I'd only add that there's maybe 10% of homeowners that can't get flood insurance right now. To make a decision to put a program in place is something we need right now.
So the program wouldn't be for the 90% that donate, it would be for the 10% of people that can't get insurance coverage.
The majority of us live in places where the risk of river flooding is not serious, 90% or so, and flood insurance is offered in the private sector. It's been taken up quite a bit. It's fairly affordable. The problem is those with high or extreme risk, and that's where coverage is, where most of the flooding happens and where most of the risk is. And to move forward to make a decision, having a program would be very helpful.
Now, I've seen some, different models. The Americans have a model through FEMA. I think the UK has just launched a model. What are some recommendations you could make on things to avoid if you were crafting a policy like that, based on,
I don't want to sound flippant, but usually what the Americans do is not working.
Okay. Yeah, I see it's about a $20 billion shortfall in their program through FEMA. I see that the UK had a policy where they would only provide subsidies for the insurance premiums for 25 years. Can you tell us why that is? Do you know why that is? So, frankly, coming up with a program so that all Canadians are protected against flood and other hazards, so that you have insurance if you experience a loss, you can recover, there's money available, is really important. That's really critical to have. Better than having a program where money is paid after loss is to not have a loss. So the commitment in the UK was to try over 25 years for a national commitment to avoid any risk of loss, put in flood defense, put in all kinds of protection. Some of us are a little skeptical whether that'll get completed in 25 years, whether there's enough funding, but the concept was it would take some time. 25 years was the time chosen politically, 25 years to not need flood insurance because you'd have protection. Interesting. So the government kind of set itself a deadline of 25 years to protect all the communities that were at risk of flood so that there wouldn't be a need for the flood insurance program. Interesting. One reason I heard is that they wanted to give people 25 years to financially plan for a future where they wouldn't have subsidized flood insurance so that they could possibly sell their property and move to a safer area, or that they could, have 25 years to invest in mitigations. Is that another reason why to have it?
Fully agree. Absolutely correct. To take the risk down to an acceptable level, that in the next 25 years we could have enough flood protection that most homes would not experience extraordinary flood risk would be a good thing. But there's still risk. I mean, you can have these very, very extreme events.
Now, can you tell us I've got 1 minute, is the DFAA program successful? And if it's not, how is it failing?
So the DFA is very proactive in the sense that it says fairly clearly, we will not pay again if you choose to rebuild in a high-risk area without the appropriate mitigation measure. And I think this is a very strong step in the right direction in that it forces, it supports that understanding of risk and that risk mapping and that mitigation planning to get to a place where we...
The changes made this year in DFA were outstanding.
What were those changes?
To focus on risk reduction, to focus on a future where we are truly trying to have more focus on reducing risk in addition to paying for losses.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours. Monsieur Saint-Pierre, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Thank you. So over the
Mr. Saint-Pierre, you have 5 minutes.
Canada went from around 38 catastrophic events from 1985 to 1994 to then doubling those catastrophic events to about 78 between 2005 and 2014. Given the increased rise of CO2 and climate pollution, we've now doubled those catastrophic events in Canada in the last decade to about 133, and 44 of those were water-related. These are events that Canadians are faced with every day, and the most vulnerable people in our society have to bear the cost. I've actually seen these impacts myself in my own riding. This past summer in the riding of Anjou, basements were flooded. So sort of a flash flood. I think Mr. Feltman mentioned $54,000 was the average cost of a flooded basement. And given the frequency of these flooding events, a lot of homeowners are unable to insure their basements. So it sort of adds to the housing crisis that some of my residents are feeling in Anjou. We're seeing that the annual cost of flooding is projected to hit $1.8 billion next year. So maybe my question to Mrs. Penwarden, would you agree that with the rise of climate change, Canadians are paying a greater price for adapting to catastrophic events?
Well, I think you've laid out the statistics yourself, which says certainly what we see with more and more extreme weather and the more frequent extreme events, as you've described, it is costing the economy and individual constituents and consumers and Canadians more each year in terms of both the insured cost, but also the personal cost, because it takes time to recover, because it takes time to rebuild, and whether they can afford insurance or not will obviously affect, the impacts. But it certainly is an escalating issue, and you can see it in some of the graphs that my colleagues have presented to you today.
Sure, like Aviva, pass on those costs to one of your clients, and would you anticipate costs to be increased in the future in terms of?
Well, I think what we can say is that Canadians are subject to many impacts of climate and extreme weather across a number of different vectors, including insurance. So anything that we can do now, as I've said in my call to action, to start to mitigate some of those impacts by taking some of the actions we've discussed will help to change the impacts in the future. So we have an opportunity, and I welcome the discussion we're having today in order to change that trajectory and change that curve.
Great. Mr. Feltmate, the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation recently produced a report called Managing Risks, Climate Resilient Shorelines for Canada. The report talks about Canadian shorelines facing risks to climate change. My colleague from Halifax is probably seeing some of those impacts herself. Can you provide a copy of this report to this committee and in less than a minute explain why nature-based or engineered solutions are required to protect our shorelines?
Yeah, so can we share the copy? The answer is yes. And basically what historically in reference to protecting shorelines, actions have turned immediately to built infrastructure, like a large cement revetments that would hold back the water, which is good. But sometimes that can end up just passing the problem further down to shore, that you solve a problem in one area, but it can cause a change in the flow dynamics along the shoreline such that solving your problem can exacerbate somebody else's. But we found that if we look at using natural infrastructure, grasses, shrubs, sedges along shoreline areas, working in combination with built infrastructure, that the two working in hand in glove take risk out of the system that can't be realized just using one or the other on its own. And engineers historically have leaned towards like the big mega infrastructure projects, but sometimes we found now that the natural infrastructure working hand in glove with built infrastructure mitigates shoreline flood risk. And by the way, the big challenge is sea level right now is rising at 6 millimeters per year, which is a lot. That's going to change the shorelines around the world, and we're going to have to deal with the consequences.
Great, thanks for that. And a few years ago, you and your colleague, I believe Catherine Bakos, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, produced a report called Change in Extreme Weather Risk from Institutional Investing. I'm curious if you could provide a copy of that report to the ENVI committee. And the report speaks to practical means to factoring in climate change and extreme weather risks into institutional investing, what you call climate risk matrices, or CRM. We know that the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, and the IISB have frequently called out for the need for better adapting climate risks to institutional and investment decisions. What should investors incorporate, or how and why should investors incorporate physical climate risk into portfolio management? So thinking about commercial real estate portfolios, the banking or wind and electricity generation.
Right now, institutional investors, when they think about climate change, the pension funds, they mostly focus almost exclusively on transition risk, the cost of on carbon and what it means to the companies they invest in. And that's fine to do. But what they've virtually completely and totally ignored are the impacts of flood, fire, hail, wind, snow load, physical climate risk impacting the operations of the companies they invest in. So now that's being brought to their attention that they have to consider both mitigation and adaptation simultaneously.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Bonnet, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mrs. Penwarden, you spoke about the federal government's adaptation strategy of $2 billion compared to Toronto, where the needs are $26 billion. In light of the fact that the adaptation needs would be how much? How would you assess that for the rest of Canada?
I don't have exact figures, but if Toronto needs $26 billion, I think you can start to imagine the impacts and the adaptation gap that we have in terms of investing. What I will say is in the current investment portfolio objectives, there is a $6 billion fund that has been put aside in the government's current budgets to actually engage and invest in projects in communities that can make a difference in terms of resilience and adaptation. It's not sufficient, but I would say at least it's a step in the right direction. What we would do is welcome, obviously, more investment at a higher level across the country to support adaptation.
You've mentioned the $6 billion. Are you referring to the fund for the communities? But I think it's far beyond adaptation. It is for public transit, for housing, etc. I take it.
Yes, there's a Build Community Strong Fund, which is $51 billion over 10 years, but there is a $6 billion tranche of that, which is to support regionally significant projects, including climate adaptation. So there is a subset within that overall plan at the moment. Not to say that that is everything that we need, but it is a good step in the right direction.
D'accord. Donc vous dites c'est
So you're saying that it's $6 billion over how many years? Is it specifically for adaptation? And how much do you believe should be set aside for adaptation? Could you give us a figure for the rest of Canada and the provinces, or what kind of numbers we have to meet the need?
I'm not an expert in calculating the adaptation cost needed for the entire country, so I would not be the right person to answer that question. All I can do is point to what we have and the $6 billion that's being earmarked at the moment and say this is good progress, but we would obviously welcome more investment by the federal government in adaptation to accelerate our response to what we see.
Est-ce que, de la part de nos autres témoins ici, est-ce que...
As to the other witnesses, would you have any figures regarding adaptation needs across Canada that is beyond the $2 billion currently earmarked for the strategy?
Produced one at this point in time. The evidence that we would share with the members we find that each dollar spent on adaptation avoids $5 to $10 of losses in the future, and the amount of money being spent is not sufficient. The losses are unacceptable, and that further investment than what is in place right now would be a really wise investment by this government.
Can I add maybe one more point to add? From 2015 to 2024, the federal government invested either directly or by way of tax subsidies $160 billion into mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Over the same period of time, the federal government invested $6.7 billion in adaptation. The ratio of spending in the country, as per the climate file, on mitigation versus adaptation, it's a ratio of 24-1. Almost everything's going to mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and virtually nothing on adaptation. So I don't know what the right ratio is, but it's not the lopsided 24-1, that's for sure. Okay.
Pouvez-vous nous parler de la différence?
Could you speak to the difference between the impact costs? That is, you're saying it's 2.5 Celsius for global warming overall. That is the current trajectory that we're on. It's approximately 5 degrees for Canada. Is there a major difference? Let's say if we were to comply with the Paris Accord, that rather than 2.5 degrees, or if we were to go beyond that? I could begin. As I mentioned, the trend is that we're increasing by 9.4% per year. My colleague has studied the societal costs of extreme weather events, and he has looked at construction costs, specifically that Canada has to pay out in order to rebuild, and that's 3% of the annual construction costs overall. That is 2 weeks every year will be allocated to rebuilding expenses. So if we're continuing on that trend, and we are following closely on the United States, if we're there, we could find ourselves in a place where costs are increasing considerably. Could you speak about the difference in the different costs depending on the scenarios? As 1.5 degrees internationally in Canada, or 2.5 degrees Celsius internationally? Is it exponential? What would the costs represent? It is exponential. That is, the more we increase, the greater the risks are. The more there will be expenditures. It will be 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of expenditures for companies, and it would be difficult to give you an exact figure, but the more we go ahead. So do you have a scenario document, some kind of analysis that could illustrate these kinds of differences, even if it's just a general sense?
With the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for 20 years, trying to answer these science questions. So we found it very hard. They're excellent questions, and they're important questions, but they're hard to answer. The part that we answered with more rigor is emissions cause warming. We've quantified that. Emissions cause more precipitation.
Okay,
emissions
thank you.
also
thank you,
cause other storms,
Mr. Kovacs.
and that's just hard to quantify.
Thank you, the witness, for those answers, and we will now move to the Conservatives. Mr. Leslie, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Kovacs. You mentioned the 10% gap that we're looking at there for coverage. So obviously we're looking at some sort of a government-supported insurance-backed system here. How do we avoid creating a system where private insurers keep profits in good years but push losses onto taxpayers in bad years?
And invite Susan to come in as well as an insurer, as opposed to an academic giving an opinion on this. So we're in a situation for flooding where about 10% of Canadians are not presently covered by flood insurance because they have high or extremer risk and are largely viewed as uninsurable because of the very high risk. Until we bring the risk down, there is going to be a long-standing issue where the private industry will say, perhaps will say, this is uninsurable. The risk is beyond our capability of offering a price that would be acceptable. If we can bring the risk down, then we are offering flood insurance to people with low risk. I mean, that's not been an issue. The private sector is very active with the 90% of us in areas that are not at high risk. So one of the critical parts is, can we identify as society those specific locations where risk is unacceptable to insurance and to society, and do something about it?
So, I come from Manitoba. We have a lot of water-related issues we have in our own property personally there. A lot of this seems to be land use and development, particularly in our case in Saskatchewan. There's a lot of impacts down upriver, so to speak, that have a big impact, as well as population growth, development in high-risk zones. And in terms of the costing, obviously the ever-increasing price of upgrading things. So you mentioned some costing with the DFAA program, some changes. Could you help me understand what those changes were and whether those enhancements allow for resiliency to be built back in better, as you kind of alluded to? If you need a bigger culvert, you need to spend more money the next time around. So could you kind of run through what those changes are and how they've been helpful thus far and where you can see them going?
So we are fans that we think the change made on April 1st in DFA was a very positive move by the Government of Canada. And we're looking for the provinces and others to pick it up and really act upon the changes. An example of one of the changes is DFA is offered under 5 streams. Stream number 5 says, once the Government of Canada accepts a provincial cost and reimburses a provincial cost, as it has for many years, as that continues to happen, there is an additional funding made available to the province, in this case 20% funding, that is used for risk reduction. This is new, very generous, where the Government of Canada says, you need $1 billion to put things back. We will give you $1 billion and 20% to put things back, and with risk reduction. So this is a very helpful change. Also, the tone of DFAA, the spirit since 1970 with the program, as the provinces picked up the program in most cases, was, can we put people back? The tone of the new program is, can we put people back with a clear message with reduced risk? The message, the purpose of what the Government of Canada is trying to make Canadians do, in my opinion, is a very helpful, improved tone. We want to put you back after a big loss with reduced risk.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit about the adaptation of the $2.1 billion program. I'm curious your assessment on how it has been prioritized thus far in terms of spending, and if you were the government, how would you prioritize that batch of money or any future batch? Like, where would you put the money towards for the best use for adaptation purposes?
I love volunteering answering, so if I can go first, as Susan and Blair and Sophie, I'm sure, would touch on as well. The fact that all the losses continue to show going up and up, it's not enough. We need more money put in for risk reduction. We know where the risks are the highest. It's very easy. We can identify, here's where the wildfires are, here's where the floods are, and we would target the areas with the highest risk. There's a scientific basis to say more money should go here than there because the risk is higher.
So, I mean, we know the actions to be taken to take a house and or a community and make it less exposed to wildfire. We know exactly what needs to be done to take houses and communities to make them less vulnerable to flooding. We can use berms, diversion channels, holding ponds, cisterns, bioswales, permeable surfacing to direct water to safe locations and keep people and property out of harm's way. What we need to do is mobilize known solutions to known problems, and we need to do it rapidly. And just to be clear, people need to understand that climate change is irreversible, period. Climate change is here to stay. We're not going backwards. All we can do is slow it down. So if we think extreme weather is extreme now, just hold on, because it's going to get a lot worse going forward.
Thank you very much for that. And we now turn to Ms. Medema for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to all the witnesses for coming. I'm really excited for day one of this study. It's a study that I proposed. I've been involved in this issue for many years, since my time working for the city of Halifax on climate change. In 2023, we had a wildfire in Tantallon that destroyed many houses in a suburban area near the kind of wildland urban interface. We had a hurricane and we had a flash flood that took 4 lives just outside of the boundary of HRM. So, thinking back to that Tantallon wildfire, we were scrambling, obviously, because Halifax and Nova Scotia aren't used to kind of this situation. And we were trying to figure out how the insurance sector plays in something like the rebuild after a wildfire, when insurance has typically been like for like in the exact same place. So maybe a question for Ms. Penwarden and others is, is the insurance sector thinking about flexibility in its coverage so that we can build back better and reduce risk on a go-forward basis?
So I can say that most insurance companies now have some sort of Build Back Better allowance within their insurance products. What's interesting is last year, for example, with all of the floods and events that we had, we wrote to all of our individual claimants to urge them to take advantage of the extra funds available, and also, as I mentioned, the municipal incentives to help them build back better. We didn't get a lot of take-up, which is interesting. So back to the education and the need to make it more visible what's available and encourage people to do that. On the subject of that in general, I think obviously we want to work on that. And when it comes to building back in the same location, typically we don't require the same location physically anymore. We will obviously move the customer or the claimant to a location that's more appropriate. That's part of the claims settlement process.
Well, as Susan touched on, most insurance companies in the last few years have brought in something. Many municipalities are doing something. This is not yet coordinated. The federal government through DFA has brought in something, but we're all doing it, and it's not yet together.
Sounds like a story that we've heard before across many issues. Thanks for that. So, Ms. Penwarden, on the other side of it, are there any benefits for your clients if they were to implement any type of resilience measure, flooding, wildfire, et cetera? Would they get like a decrease in their insurance premium? And is that typical of the insurance sector in Canada?
Certainly they would. If they let us know that they've taken specific resilience measures, we will change their premium based on those measures that are shared with us that they've done. So yes, we will do that in terms of premium. We also factor that into our cost models, so which is a more, if you like, a wider way of looking at risk. So we look at it both individual property level and also if there's community level resilience changes that are made, that comes into our pricing as a general possibility. And I know that other insurance companies are looking at the same types of incentives. Each does their own sort of version of it, but there's definitely incentives for individual Canadians to take those actions.
What does the math look like on that? Would there be, a calculated, return on investment for the homeowner? So say the measure cost, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000. Would the premium ultimately pay that down over a certain number of years? Like, do you have numbers on that?
I don't have specific numbers on that, but if you think about the fact that we're insuring many, many Canadians across many, many different geographies, it would be hard because we share risk as it is. It's a pool of risk, if you like, and everybody helps to contribute to everybody's insurance coverage. So it's a little less than a one-to-one relationship, but there's definitely some reduction in cost for an individual Canadian who takes those actions.
Have comments on that?
One quick point, and so we're talking a lot about insurance and incentives and adjustments in premiums and cap limits and so forth. That's all important, but also don't forget the banks. So we're in the early stages of discussion right now with the banks for homeowners who put the measures in place to mitigate flood or wildfire risk. Could they get a couple of basis points shaved off the cost of their mortgage because there's a lower probability of them having a flooded basement or a house burned down, which if you're holding the mortgage on a property, that's important. So there's multiple financial drivers emerging rapidly.
Thank you very much for that. And we will now move to Mr. Bonin for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blair, I believed you spoke about the reassurance program. How many years now has the federal government been speaking, studying, looking at the possibility of implementing this kind of program?
Pour les 1.5...
For the $1.5 billion for that percentage of people who cannot be insured. I think it's 15% that you mentioned.
Residential housing market, 1.5 million Canadians. So if the question is how long has the federal government been looking at this file? For a long time. And we've got lots of policy on it. The problem isn't policy. We're policy rich and operations poor. That's the problem. We've had in 2016, we had the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, which had explicit direction in it in Chapter 4 on how to mobilize adaptation. Nothing happened. From that report. 2018, we had the Adaptation Resiliency Measures Roundtable and Report. That came out in 2018. Within 6 months, that sat on a shelf. Now, in 2023, we had the National Adaptation Strategy, which put out 26 targets to mobilize action on adaptation, 10 of which are to be realized before 2026 closes. And we're virtually going to miss all of those. So the problem is, when we have known solutions to known problems and we cannot get the federal government to act, to mobilize on that direction. That's the problem.
Ça prendrait combien de temps pour mettre en place?
How much time would it take to implement a kind of insurance program for that?
Short period of time, 2 to 5 years or something like that, because we know what needs to be done. And to a large extent, we're doing it. And what we're doing, to some extent, we're saying, by the way, we'd like to get support of the federal government, like come along with us.
Okay. Quand on parle, Mr. Kovacs,
Mr. Kovacs, you've spoken about management. I believe that you're a specialist, you're an expert in crisis management. Many provinces come into play when a disaster occurs. For example, the Army will come in and help. So would it not be better to strengthen the province's intervention abilities and to coordinate these together rather than creating a completely new national or federal intervention structure? It seems to me that the principle of subsidiarity that is closer to people would be more efficient. And what is it that we need on a federal level exactly?
So, very much it would be better to have a national system for emergency management. Most countries, almost all countries have done this. Canada right now has not got as much coordination between what the federal government does, what the provincial governments, what municipal. Having that coordination would be a good thing.
Thank you for that. And we will now turn to the Conservatives with Mr. Bexty for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. I appreciate it. This is a very important topic. I have to some of my questions were stolen by other members across the way, so they beat me to the punch, and that's fantastic. I did want to talk or ask some questions related to, I think the comment was proactively incentivizing resiliency. That there are always unintended consequences of other actors, different levels of government doing things, civil works that impact each other, right? How do we develop a bit more coordinated organization, structure, strategy to make sure that we're not, cutting off our nose to spite our face by other actors? And maybe a specific instance, I know where there's been some overland flooding that we had flood maps, and this goes to the next question about flood mapping and the status of that, where a road gets built that hasn't been included in that map, but then exacerbates a flooding event because water can't drain like it used to drain, right? And then how does that impact the homeowner?
I can build on, in particular, coordination. It ties back to the earlier question as well. Our research shows if the homeowner spends $1 to protect their home, if the community spends $1 to protect their home, there will be $5 or $10 of avoided losses. The challenge right now is the homeowner does not themselves get the $5 to $10. It is shared by the homeowner, but also by the Government of Canada, by the provincial government, by the municipal government, by the insurance company. And if we have a system where you're waiting entirely for insurance to pay all of the costs, it isn't adding up. It hasn't happened, right? Insurance does give discounts, but it is not enough to get homeowners to work. Until we get that coordination where all of those who are benefiting come together and coordinate what they are doing and jointly say, together we will put one big incentive or we will coordinate the different incentives we do. And how do you do that? Someone needs to lead. And at the moment, the leaders have been municipal governments. They are acting very effectively. And insurance companies. That's not coordinated, but they have independently have seen their own enlightened reasons to do this. And at the moment, the federal government is not there. The provinces are really not there. So it's someone, hopefully the federal government, would bring all the beneficiaries together and say, we will now coordinate what we do or want to do, and give back some of the benefits we are getting, because there's a lot of money on the table that's getting lost because we're failing to protect ourselves.
So following from that, how essential is it to complete modern flood mapping and keeping it alive, right? So it is updated in a meaningful time frame. Anyone? Go ahead, Mr. Feltmate.
Basically, Canada has to swallow some very tough medicine on flood risk mapping. It's the kind of, people like flood risk maps until they have them. And then all of a sudden they find out this community over here or this community over here is now designated as being in a flood zone. And people, I can tell you, I've been involved in this many times, people go apoplectic when that happens because you've now devalued their property and stigmatized it, you've red tagged it. And almost immediately they start with, how do we even know climate change is real? Like that's, that will be their response. However, by not recognizing that we need floodplain maps to direct where not to build or where to reinforce building to mitigate the flood risk, by not addressing this is what, for the graph I showed at the very beginning with the costs going up, exponentially. That's what you get. There is no way to cheat this system. If you cheat the system, you're going to lose. And that's the way it is.
Okay. Very small part I'd add, if I can, very quickly.
Real quick.
That flood maps are not ideal. They need to improve. We have maps for wildfire, and they're excellent. We have maps for tornadoes. We have maps for hail. We have maps for a lot of the climate risks, and they're outstanding. Flood needs some work.
So a little bit further on that, I'm not sure if you're familiar. There was some overland flooding in my riding, Bow River, Tabor, Alberta, in 2018. And subsequent to that, not 2018, but the Horsefly Spillway project near Tabor to mitigate this was a municipal and intermunicipal project. It's delayed because of COVID, because of lots of other things, and prices are escalating. So how do we bridge that gap when projects get delayed and inflation? They ran out of project money because the budget ran out. How do we get past that?
Advising the government of Alberta, who have to take the lead with support from the federal government. Before the 2013 flooding, there had been studies about what needed to be done for Calgary, and they weren't done. And so there were losses in 2013 were avoidable. Anyways, the key is to just get on. Do something.
Just figure it out.
Just
okay.
do something.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we will go to Mr. Fanjoy.
Thank you, witnesses. Mr. Kovacs, I'd like you to elaborate. You were saying how flood mapping can be updated, needs to be updated, and you suggested that wildfires are the state of knowing where that risk is stronger, hailstorms and other extreme weather events. I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate that because I would have thought that floodplains would be more predictable, and I didn't get that impression.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The most common hazard in our country is flood, so we need to get this one right, and it's not right at the moment. But there was $13 billion worth of damage that Canadians experienced last year, and it wasn't all flooding. Most of it wasn't flooding last year. And so how do we look across all the hazards as part of our research program? We know where the wildfires are. The maps are all agreed to. There's not a debate about the wildfire maps. We know where the hail happens. We know where the very strong winds create tornadoes and hurricanes. So for most of the climate hazards, for earthquakes, moving past climate, the hazard maps are determined. They were determined 20 years ago, and we just nudge it every year. Flood, it keeps changing. We have people move into zones of high risk. We're trying in the 70s to stop that, but we have people move into zones of high risk. The one is where the water goes. It's how fast the water goes, but it's what you put in these different locations, and we need to do better on the flood maps. The maps, even if you get them all up to date, they need to be maintained. That's part of the process as well. And flood map, that's a bigger challenge than most of the other hazards.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Feltmate, you brought up the ratio between measures to mitigate extreme weather events, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and to adapt. And I think the ratio you shared was 26-1, mitigation versus adaptation. I think it would be interesting to know what, from a public policy standpoint, what would be a good ratio, or at least a good range for that to be in. Has there been any study by the insurance industry or the adaptation community on what that ratio should be?
Yeah, in terms of a study, I'm not sure it was a study, but when you turn to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, for example, was leaning more into the zone of 50-50. And I'm not sure that was based on a rigorous algorithm than more gut feel. But what they were saying, it certainly is not, it's certainly not 24-1. And but it's, I think probably very much in that zone of a 50-50 ratio that many people would agree with.
Okay, thank you. I believe it was you, Mr. Feltmate, that presented the graph showing the increased rate of insured losses over the years. My first question was, were those inflation-adjusted numbers? Okay, I thought so.
Well, it's adjusted for inflation and for per capita wealth accumulation. In other words, if you were insuring twice as many homes today as 10 years ago, you'd assume insurance would be twice as high. So that's taken into account. So horizontally, you were looking at a comparison of apples to apples.
Okay. Good. And it was a curve, and it was a curve that was getting steeper. It's hard to imagine a more existential crisis for an insurance industry than unmitigated climate change. How prepared is the insurance industry for that curve to get steeper?
Well, so I'm not speaking for the insurance industry, but overall, there's about 160 property and casualty insurance companies in Canada, or something in that order. I could say some are very well prepared. It tends to be those at the larger end of the equation are much better prepared than others, but there's a lot of variance in the system.
Okay. And how well are the different levels of government, you mentioned municipal government and the insurance industry is working quite well together. Provinces and the federal government, you were leaving those out, I noted. How big is the gap? How much more? What would you like to see?
From my perspective, I spend a great deal of time with mayors and councillors across this country, and I would say something like 9 out of 10 mayors, when you show them this is what you need to do, the actions you need to take in your community to help your constituents not end up with a flooded basement or their house burned down. 9 out of 10 get it instantly within 5 or 10 minutes, and they want to mobilize action to mitigate the risk. Adaptation in Canada is moving forward at the level of the municipality.
Thank you very much for that testimony to all our witnesses. Thank you very much for all that. That was very enlightening. We will now suspend and give our staff time to get our next round of witnesses in for round 2.
Thank you, sir.
protection aux résidents.
The committee is resuming its study on protecting Canadian residents from extreme weather.
This afternoon, we are meeting with the following witnesses. As an individual, Mr. Craig Stewart, author. Corporation of the City of Markham, Mr. Robert Muir, Manager, Stormwater Environmental Services. And from Wawanesa Mutual, David Leibil, Vice President, Sustainability and Corporate Affairs, and Mitchell McKibben, Director, Sustainability and Climate Affairs. Welcome all. So, chacun des témoins dispose de 5 minutes pour leur allocution.
Each witness has 5 minutes for their remarks. You will be seeing this little sheet held up, which will indicate 1 minute for the end of your speech. And on the back, we ask you that you...
So we will start with Mr. Craig Stewart. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair and distinguished committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you on your present study on protecting Canadian residents from extreme weather events. For the past decade, I have worked closely with many of your other panelists, leading advocacy work for the property and casualty insurance industry on disaster resilience. In that capacity, I founded a national advocacy coalition called Climate Proof Canada, co-chaired the Disaster Resilience and Advisory Committee for Canada's first National Adaptation Strategy, and co-chaired the National Advisory Committee on Flood Insurance. I have now left IBC and speak only as an individual expert. My opinions are my own. 71 years ago, on October 15, 1954, Canada experienced its worst natural disaster in modern times when Hurricane Hazel swept through southern Ontario, claiming 81 lives. The regional government of Metropolitan Toronto had been formed that very year, and together with the provincial government of Leslie Frost and the federal government of Louis Saint Laurent, collaborated on swift action to ensure Ontarians and Canadians would be better prepared for hurricanes in the future. Saint Laurent and Frost, one a Liberal and the other a PC, collaborated in appointing a Royal Commission. As a result of that Commission's findings, the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority was formed within 3 years to oversee management and flood control across 9 watersheds. The Dominion Weather Bureau was resourced to provide better flood forecasting and alerts during severe weather events. And most importantly, the Conservation Authorities Act in Ontario was modified to allow authorities to procure land and regulate development in floodplains, paving the way for the establishment of the Greenbelt. Today, Toronto residents are safer, and flood losses in Ontario are less because of the focused collaboration between the Frost and Saint Laurent governments in the lee of Hurricane Hazel. All of this from one event. Now to the present. In our work preparing the National Adaptation Strategy, Canadian experts identified 3 risk factors related to extreme weather events: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. The first factor is the hazard itself: flood, wind, hail, wildfire, and is usually determined by geography. For example, if you live in dry coniferous forest, you may face wildfire risk. If you live in a valley bottom next to a river, you may face flood risk. But that does not determine your outcome. The second factor involves exposure to that hazard. If your home is built with fire-resistant materials in a fire-smart community, your exposure to wildfire can be decreased. The massive investment in the Red River floodway in the 1960s reduced flood exposure for most of the city of Winnipeg. The third factor involves personal vulnerability. 2 neighbors facing the same hazard with the same degree of exposure may face very different outcomes based on either their financial or health-related situations. If one person, for instance, has chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, they are more vulnerable. Their health may be impacted much more severely by extreme heat or wildfire smoke than a neighbor. If one is better protected by their insurance policy or has ample savings, they may be less financially vulnerable and able to recover financially from extreme weather losses than one who does not. Therefore, a financially sustainable path forward to protect Canadian residents from extreme weather should include measures to reduce both household exposure and personal vulnerability. Household exposure can be reduced by some of the measures you've heard already. Retrofitting homes to make them more climate resilient, building new homes to higher resilience standards, implementing defensive infrastructure, and ensuring communities are fire smart. Personal vulnerability can be reduced by ensuring we identify vulnerable populations in advance of extreme heat and wildfire smoke events and provide necessary supports to them. Financial vulnerability can be addressed by ensuring public insurance programming is in place where private insurance is no longer available, starting with high-risk flood. Finally, there has been too little collaboration between orders of government beyond the programmatic level. The development of the National Adaptation Strategy did not engage other orders of government in a meaningful way. Ongoing disaster preparedness discussions do occur at federal, provincial, territorial tables, such as the senior officials responsible for emergency management, but we need to strengthen on this base. Politicians have collaborated with urgency across orders of government and across political parties in the past. All that is needed now is sufficient political will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Mr. Muro.
Thank you. Good day, and thank you for the opportunity to support the work of the committee and speak on the important topic of extreme weather damages. I'm Robert Muir. I'm a professional engineer who has practiced across the country for 35 years, specializing in flood hazard and stormwater management for natural and urban systems. I'm currently the manager of stormwater at the City of Markham, where we developed a long-term $386 million flood control program to reduce flood risks. The program, now in its 12th year of project construction, reduces sewer backup, overland, and river flood risks through proven cost-effective means. Prior to joining the city, I was a partner at Dillon Consulting Limited, where I was the National Water Resources Practice Leader. My work there included developing and reviewing citywide master plans to reduce risks in municipalities like Stratford and Windsor, Ontario. In Markham and in the private sector, I've been active in the development of flood management guidelines, including Natural Resources Canada's federal guidelines on flood hazard identification and priority setting, CSA Standard W21021, prioritization of flood risk in existing communities, and the National Research Council's cost-benefit guideline. The full title of the latter document was Guidelines on Undertaking a Comprehensive Analysis of Benefits, Costs, and Uncertainties of Storm Drainage and Flood Control Infrastructure in a Changing Climate. I'd like to draw from these NRC guidelines to comment on the October 6 motion. On economic losses, the motion states that insured losses alone do not adequately represent economic losses. Data provided by Munich Re and presented in the NRC guidelines supports that motion statement. Specifically, expected uninsured losses were estimated to be over 90% of reported insured losses. On finding a financially sustainable path forward to protect Canadians, the federal government has already taken important steps to reduce costs and risks. One step is through supporting guidelines for risk prioritization to guide its partners in identifying worthwhile projects. Another step is through grant funding like Housing Infrastructure and Community Canada's Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, DMAF, and that funds 40% of project design and construction costs. In Markham, 5 sewer upgrade projects have been completed with generous DMAF grant support, and more projects, including naturalized floodplain reclamation, are now ongoing. In my opinion, the DMAF program is a strong template for financially sustainable risk reduction efforts, as it requires a minimum project benefit cost ratio of 2:1 for approval. This was a unique requirement for infrastructure funding in Canada. A review of over 20 approved DMAF projects in our NRC guidelines showed ratios between 5.5 and 17, showing the high cost effectiveness of approved projects. In the future, additional DMAF type funding can continue to cost effectively reduce risks across Canada. How much funding? I'm glad you asked. The NRC guidelines included a case study to answer this specific question. We estimated the 10-year national infrastructure project spending that could be justified based on damage reduction benefits was $28 billion. and this compares to $9.5 billion in project spending that DMAF program grants of $3.8 billion could support today. In conclusion, 3 times more spending can be justified even with pre-2024 extreme weather and damages. Increased weather risks and damages would only increase the benefits of project spending. In closing, I'd be pleased to submit a brief on the above, including some further recommendations on tracking losses to help assess risk reduction effectiveness over time. Thank you.
Mayor. And the floor is yours, Mr. Leibel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Very pleased to be here on behalf of Wabanesa Insurance to join this important conversation. Wabanesa is a national insurer. We insure about just under 2 million Canadians across Canada. And we are a mutual insurer, which means that we're owned by the Canadians that we are privileged to protect. We've been in business for about 130 years, and that is a very long time. But there is no precedent for what we're seeing now when it comes to the impacts of severe weather on the communities that we're fortunate to serve. If you were in downtown Winnipeg this summer, where our headquarters is located, you would have had a front row seat to something that was certainly unprecedented, at least in this part of Canada. We're immediately adjacent, our headquarters, to the Winnipeg Convention Centre, which is filled this summer not with conference delegates, but with wildfire evacuees, as was the case with hotels across Winnipeg. And it was a front row seat to very significant human hardship and disruption with people displaced from their communities. We are doing our best as a mutual insurer, as other insurers are trying to do, to be part of the solution. In the past 3 years alone, we've committed over $5 million to people and organizations on the front lines of climate change. This committee has heard about the gap when it comes to adaptation spending. That's where we're directing a significant allocation of our funds. However, we, of course, need a whole of society of approach. The committee's heard that many times today, and there are many levers that only government can pull. And I'll share my time with my colleague, Mitch McEwen, and then glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Extreme weather is no longer a future projection, it's a present reality. Protecting Canadians now requires a more proactive, collaborative approach across government, industry, and communities. Insurance is fundamentally a promise to be there when people need us the most. The growing frequency and severity of climate change-fueled extreme weather is threatening that promise, and the industry cannot solve it alone. The solution is reducing losses in the first place and making recovery more faster and predictable for Canadians. We recommend 3 priority areas. First is building climate-ready homes and infrastructure. Canada needs modernized building standards, land use planning, and clear national resilience standards. Federal investments should focus on the highest risk communities and support municipalities as they upgrade infrastructure that keep people safe. Second is to strengthen disaster recovery. Canadians in the highest risk areas need predictable financial protection after major events, including a national flood insurance program and a federal earthquake backstop. Recovery also depends on the ability of local governments to manage prolonged rebuilding and re-entry efforts. Third is to help Canadians take practical action. Homeowners want to reduce their risk, but often lack clear guidance. Canada needs consistent standards and accessible incentives for proven resilience measures like fire-resistant materials and wind and hail-resistant roofs. Wabanesa is already making investments in community resilience, such as a sponsorship for the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction's Resilience Display in Winnipeg, and providing 35 wildfire prevention grants across Canada since 2022. Neither the government nor the private sector can solve climate impacts alone. Government brings the scale and private infrastructure, and insurers bring the risk and on-the-ground experience. Partnerships let us move from reacting to disasters towards preventing them, and is the most efficient way to protect lives, reduce losses, and keep insurance coverage available and affordable for Canadians. In closing, Wabanesa is committed to working with the government and industry partners to make these solutions a reality. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. We'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So we will start with Mr. Lloyd for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Stewart, are you familiar with the Adapting to Rising Flood Risk report? I found it very interesting in this report that it stated that they estimate, as of 2020 numbers, there's about $3 billion in annual flood risk. and that 34% of that risk is 1% of all properties. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. I mean, the report essentially says that the top 10% account for about 90% of the risk. So the financial costs of flooding, the financial exposure to flooding, is highly concentrated in that top 10% of Canadians that can't obtain presently adequate flood insurance.
It was pretty shocking to me that 1%, probably over $1 billion now, is just that 1% of properties. This is it starts to make it wonder, is there any insurance policy out there that can mitigate risk when it's 1% of properties having 34% of the risk? Or what are the other options that you think the government should be looking at and working with communities to mitigate this risk?
So, as you've heard, investments in infrastructure, focusing, if another DMAF program was to be funded, focusing that infrastructure spending on that 1%, on those at highest risk, is going to provide the best return on investment. Where insurers are still playing a role with flood is ensuring the 90% where unpredictable risk is happening. So we were getting these significant rainfall events, such as what happened last summer in southern Ontario and Quebec, as what happened in 2023 in Nova Scotia. These were unpredictable events where there were significant billions of dollars in flood losses. But
I actually toured Grand Forks this summer, and they had a significant flood event a number of years ago. They did receive some DMAF funding, but they actually had to buy out an entire neighborhood because there was no way, even with $100 million extra, that they could protect that neighborhood. And people were saying there was a big issue because once this flood happened, the value of those properties dropped by 2/3, and this is people's livelihoods. And so they actually had to come forward and agree to pay the people out something close to what the pre-flood value was of their property. These were mostly low-income people and fixed-income people. Is there a policy that says that maybe we should be moving people out of their communities? Is that the most cost-effective way?
That is, it's the most expensive and most difficult decision to make. It has been made in High River, Alberta. It's been made along the Bow in Calgary. It's been made across the river here in Gatineau.
It's the most expensive, but in this case, they ruled that it was cheaper to do than mitigating. So it's not always the most expensive, is it?
It's the most politically difficult because you're disrupting people and they don't want to necessarily move. In Calgary, where the offer was made and it was voluntary, I think along the Elbow Park part of Calgary, I think about 1 in 3 households decided to move, and that was right after they'd been flooded. The others decided that they wanted to stay. So
I'm going to go to their insurance friends here. If there were to be a national flood insurance program, based on this report that I was citing, it was saying that a mandatory opt-in would probably be the best way to ensure that they had the widest coverage. But I've been told that a federal government mandating mandatory opt-in infringes on provincial responsibility. Can you elaborate on that issue?
I think this underscores the need to have a nationally led dialogue, because where we've seen challenges in implementation so far is in part around interjurisdictional authority and responsibilities. So a federal-led discussion is key. We do need all stakeholders at the table to continue to drive the best form of implementation. Certainly for insurers, this is something we've been advocating for a very long time. My colleague Craig Stewart, in his former role on behalf of IBC, was leading that discussion. The position that we've certainly taken as an insurer, as I think others have taken, is we will work with government to establish the right framework for Canadians.
Confirm, though, there is a provincial issue with mandatory opt-in? Is that a provincial responsibility?
I can't comment specifically on that.
I'll move on to my final minute and a half of questioning. I know this is a study about climate-related disasters, but I've been told that the largest disaster risk for Canada is an earthquake on the West Coast. And that's not necessarily a climate-related risk. But Mr. Stewart, maybe, could you elaborate for us? It's not an unlikely scenario. And are we prepared as a country for it? And if not, what do we need to start doing now to prepare?
So this is the issue that keeps insurance executives up at night more than any other is the possibility of a Cascadia subduction earthquake after the 2011 earthquake that happened off the coast of Japan, which was far greater than any modeling had predicted. That it was a 9.0. There was an analysis done globally on where else such big earthquakes could happen, and unfortunately, off the coast of BC is one of those zones. And it is difficult to imagine the extent, essentially, the continental shelf that would basically drop 6 feet. So Delta BC would be underwater. You would basically have the ocean just flood roll in. And so this is in the words of a previous OSFI superintendent, this is an event that will happen. We just don't know when. And
very soon.
It could happen soon. The last significant quake, the periodicity of these quakes over time is about one every 500 years. The last one was 300 years ago. So, so that's the event that we worry about the most.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miedema, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Is it you? Oh, great. Thank you so much to all the witnesses. I know very well the pain of trying to negotiate a buyout program from a city role with the provincial counterpart using the available federal dollars. And this is a hard question, and maybe there are no good answers, but any suggestions on what the federal government could do aside of a convening role, or maybe like a strategy that has no teeth, around actually enabling buyout programs for very at-risk homes and neighborhoods. In Nova Scotia, there's one along the Bedford Basin. It floods up the staircases of the basements fairly regularly. We were hoping that the province would enable a buyout program where the city actually took over the land, made it a park, a public space, using federal available dollars, but they didn't want to do that. So any suggestions on a path forward for that type of kind of between a rock and a hard place? Maybe Mr. Stewart to start?
It's a very difficult question. Public Safety Canada analyzed it extensively in the course of preparing that report. There are good examples across the country. The best example is province of Quebec, where they did introduce a buyout program. Unfortunately, the price of the buyout was about $200,000 on average, which was too low to entice people to accept it. Where Public Safety Canada landed was the best timing to do it is after an event. Instead of rebuilding, that's when you try to offer people money so that they don't rebuild in harm's way. But it's difficult to get people to leave unless you somehow make it a mandatory buyout program, which is sometimes politically very difficult. So there's lots of great experience across the country from these buyout programs. You can learn from High Rivers, the one that's held up as in Alberta, is probably the most successful. But at least putting the framework in place, the SORM discussions with the provinces on this topic are well along. Like they have discussed it; it's not new, and so there is a foundation to build upon.
Thank you. Maybe a question for Wawanesa folks. We heard in the first hour some commentary about the devaluation of homes and properties from risk. I actually thought that Intact had a study showing that the perception, it was more of a perception of a devaluation of property than a reality. Does anyone have any updated study or figures on that? If they're in a flood-prone or fire-prone area, are their values actually decreasing?
Thank you for the question. We encourage the government to continue to work to improve hazard data so Canadians can, of course, understand their risks. With that as well, we also encourage the focus on risk reduction rather than risk transfer, but we don't have any current stats at this moment.
Okay. Anyone else on that?
There's a body of work on this also south of the border. The sense is that immediately after an event, devaluation occurs, but people tend to think it's not going to happen to them and tend to be optimistic. That's why people still buy homes in Miami Beach, which is going to be underwater in 20 to 30 years. So it's why high earthquake-prone zones, people still buy homes there. The best clear example in Canada is where the City of Edmonton released flood zone maps. There was great fear that there would be devaluation of home prices in areas that were at high risk from those maps. Didn't occur to the extent that City Council in Edmonton expected it to have happened. And so most of the devaluation can happen right after an event has happened, but people have short memories. It's the best way.
Mr. Muir, do you have any comments on that? I know that you also participated in a class action suit for Oakville. Any comments on municipal federal kind of interactions and property values and lawsuits in the time I have remaining?
Yes, and I could comment, I guess, on how to get the flood-prone properties out of the floodplain. The DMAF program did include funding for property purchase. So in a naturalized floodplain reclamation wetland we're building right now in Markham, the land purchase was funded through DMAF. So we could show a positive benefit cost ratio and even buy those properties at market value. In terms of impacts in watersheds with development, such as in that Oakville case, I think it's important to have strong watershed managers, conservation authorities looking at the cumulative effects of development so that we can avoid increasing existing risks.
Is my time up? Okay, thanks so much.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Bonnet, you have 6 minutes. Mr. Stewart, do you have any numbers regarding the increase of insurance costs for homeowners over the last few years? Is there a specific trend that you can point to indicating that it's more expensive?
The best data source on this is actually the Consumer Price Index. So Statistics Canada actually has a component of the shelter index that focuses on property and mortgage insurance. And when you take a look at the last 22 years since the CPI index has been introduced and monitored, the two components of the shelter index that have risen the most are fuel oil and property insurance. And so the number has gone up in that time, I think about 370%. So yes, we have the numbers and we can track them on a provincial basis.
Et pour l'augmentation au niveau des assurances.
And regarding the increasing cost of insurance, is there a portion of that increase that we can tie directly to the cost of extreme weather events?
Inflation, the cost of replacement materials, such as lumber, cost of labor, all factors into that. But at the bottom line is that insurers price risk, and the risk has escalated significantly across Canada, particularly since 2009, and it's been a driving factor. And I know my colleagues who you heard from this morning, both Dr. Feltmate and Dr. Kovacs, have done a fair amount of work on assessing exactly this.
Okay. Est-ce que vous êtes en mesure de fournir?
Could you provide us with something on this so that we can see the specific costs, please? So that the committee can see this. Do we have any numbers regarding agriculture, the impacts on agriculture producers when it comes to the cost of increased insurance, the impact that this has on them?
We do have the numbers. However, crop insurance is run under a federally run program. They probably have those numbers. The property and casualty insurance industry doesn't have those numbers.
Okay. Au niveau de Label,
Mr. Label,
un lien entre changement climatique
you've drawn a link between climate change
pour les assurances.
and the increased risks for insurance companies. Is that correct?
Vous faites aussi le lien changement climatique.
And you've also drawn a connection between climate change and greenhouse gas emissions due to fossil fuels, I take it.
That's right, but however you would attribute the cause, we're certainly seeing a clear trend line towards more frequent and severe weather events that are driving up the cost of insurance and claims.
Et on nous dit souvent,
We often hear that insurance companies will insure new fossil fuel energy projects. Do you find that it's inconsistent? That you have insurance companies that are funding these kinds of fossil fuel companies, and the fact that this is driving up the risks?
Fair question. And I would say for us as an insurance company, we want to be partners in funding a transition. We recognize the global climate around energy and Canada's own ambitions around energy needs and energy independence. We need to be mindful of that as an insurance company. We think there's room for both. So certainly as an individual insurer, we have a growing allocation of our invested assets to what we call impact investments. Are we still partners in insuring the energy industry? Yes, we are, very much. I would say that we and other insurers are very much on a journey and mindful of the broader geopolitical climate.
est-ce que, par cohérence, vous pensez que les...
So when I'm speaking about consistency, do you believe that insurers should have transition plans in place that set out, for example, that are consistent with the Paris?
Well, some of this is prescribed to us. So under insurance companies are federally regulated by OSFI, so our federal superintendent of insurance, and there's legislation to which we must align and report on some of these issues specific to addressing climate risks and documenting how these risks impact our own business, that of our, we call the members as mutual, policyholders, and mitigating opportunities.
Okay. Je sais que c'est pas prescrit, là, mais est-ce que vous pensez que les compagnies d'assurance devraient...
I know that's not prescribed, but do you believe that insurers, regardless of what the government is saying, that simply to be consistent, that insurers should have a transition plan in place that is that respects the climate accord?
Our focus as an insurer is on physical risks, such as wildfires, hail, flood, and extreme heat, which of course directly direct our policyholders.
Pardon. Pouvez-vous répondre par oui ou non? Est-ce que vous pensez que les compagnies devraient avoir des plans de transition alignés sur l'accord de Paris?
Should you please give me a yes or no answer? Should insurers have climate plans in place?
Resilience and recovery systems to protect people from extreme weather.
Oui ou non?
Yes or no? About transition plans.
Yes, we need a transition plan. So.
Last remark. Last remark.
Very briefly respond, if I might. There is no insurer in Canada immune to these challenges. It is a hockey stick curve. Last year was a significant, we've all heard the $9 billion figure. Interestingly, this year, at least from an insured loss perspective, it was not a bad year. Yet the human hardship, the disruption was profound across our country. So every insurer is invested in this. Every insurer is at a different point along their journey through our partners at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And you heard from Paul Kovacs this morning. There's work we're doing collectively, but I don't think there's an insurer in Canada right now that doesn't have some plan because this impacts their own futures so significantly. Thanks very much.
Mr. Ross, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's a number of us here that are brand new MPs. But in my previous life, I actually dealt with this as an MLA for the provincial legislature in BC, as well as a chief councillor back in my small native village in BC. And I think it was Mr. Leibel and Mr. Bacuna that put it best. We need a whole-of-society approach. And just looking at this list, I mean, we're talking about individual responsibility, health vulnerability, zoning. You're talking about provincial alignment across all the ministries, mining, forestry. We're talking about relocation issues. We're talking about the devaluation of properties. We're talking the cost to the taxpayer, whether we're talking about a failed model in the United States or the DFA program in Canada, which could be offset by the topic that we're talking about here today. But we haven't even begun to talk about the larger range of issues that have to fall under this umbrella. We're not talking about the transboundary agreement, for example, that caused the flooding in Abbotsford. We're not talking about dams and their role in managing floods. And not just your round of panels discussion, but the panel before you emphasized that this work is already done. It's already documented extensively over the last 10 years. All we need now is government action. But to Mr. Leibel, I suppose, where would this government provide its best effort in kickstarting this process, which covers a lot of different sectors?
I appreciate you've laid out the business case for government investment and leadership in this area more eloquently than I could. And as a leader who has held previous roles prior to joining this table or this House, you would know well that it's smaller municipalities and local leaders that are often on the front lines of this issue. They're closest to their constituents. They are the ones who see at a ground level the impacts on families, often people that they know, members of their community, their neighbors. And it's also these same communities where leaders have the fewest resources. The infrastructure simply isn't there. Canada is fortunate, in my view, that we have had such strong ambassadorship and local leadership from municipalities. And part of the reason is because they are on the front lines of this issue and they're hearing it from their residents. But you laid out a clear business case for the need for a coordinated national response. In my view, there's areas of this that do not need to be over-orchestrated. What we're seeing, at least in the insurance sector, and these are very early days because the nature of the threat is evolving so quickly, but climate resilience or severe weather resilience is also emerging as a bit of a competitive space within the insurance industry. And this is very positive, and there's opportunity here for real innovation. Government could, for example, create something of an innovation fund that might incentivize insurers to put more of their own money, provided there was some government partnership. In this sense, perhaps there's opportunities to leverage private partner opportunities, private-public opportunities, rather, without the need for the level of coordination that you've rightly described to truly have a coordinated national response. But that is a very steep hill to climb. We must do that work, but where are the opportunities along the way? Because we need those too, and the experiences from this past summer and in recent years shows us the time for action and mitigation is clearly now. Canadians need it.
Thank you very much. And it has been cited that the USA model is actually failing, mainly because it's over budget and it doesn't cover all the costs coming from extreme weather events. But Canada's got the DFA, and we're talking around the issue of trying to mitigate that cost, or maybe building on the DFA. But in this case, we're talking about a partnership with the private sector, which is the insurance sector. Is there a pathway forward that's open and transparent and accountable to the people of Canada to say that, yes, we're going to mitigate these costs, including all the encouragement to homeowners in building in high-risk areas? Mr. Leibel.
Thank you for the question. I think that partnership is essential. Canadians look to their insurance companies rightly to protect them, but when climate risk becomes a near certainty, it's no longer a risk but almost a certain event. The role of insurers there is very limited, and that's not how the insurance system was designed. So for Canadians to have adequate protection, there needs to be that partnership between insurers and government. We've started down that road. We're certainly very open to it, and I think I speak on behalf of the industry. We're always willing to come to the table because these discussions are essential.
Very much. Mr. Fanjoy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses. If I may call you David, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, and I don't want to make it do it wrong.
You and most others, it's Leibel. Yeah,
it is Leibel. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm quite familiar with Wawanesa. When you were talking about locations downtown Winnipeg, I was there for most of a decade nearby on Gary Street. So I wanted to ask about rural policyholders, of which I would expect you have many. rural residents of Canada face all the same issues with respect to climate change and extreme weather events, and but I expect that their experience recovering from those events is different from people in the cities. Perhaps you could elaborate on what we're facing from a rural lens. Thank you.
Appreciate the question. So we do insure across Canada, but we have many rural members, and certainly the challenges in rural communities are quite pronounced and often more pronounced than in urban centres. So in urban centres, we saw this with the hail in Calgary, the flooding in southern Ontario and Quebec last year, very catastrophic, enormous damages. That rain last year in southern Ontario and Montreal, just for context, the volume of insured losses just from that 48 hours of rain was roughly equivalent to the average annual insured losses that we used to see an entire year just a generation ago. So this is the reality we're in right now. That's the concentration. In rural areas, you don't have that same concentration, but you don't also have the same level of infrastructure. And again, with local leaders, we have full partners at the table, and certainly we invest as part of our philanthropic giving and our community giving to organizations that are supporting rural communities, farmers in particular, around mitigation and awareness efforts. But what we've heard from local leaders is that they absolutely need the supports. In some of these communities, you may have mayors and reeves that are in a part-time role, for example. The infrastructure simply is not there. These are the communities that are often demonstrating exceptional leadership. Rural communities are tough, and rural communities know how to respond to challenge. That's not new. But when the face of the threat is evolving as quickly as it is, we need to be there to support them. So when we hear, for example, as we did this summer, that one rural community is lending fire trucks to another, that's wonderful. But is there a coordinated federal response to help these same local leaders so that we can be there in their time of need?
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to ask, you have stronger home and eco-friendly coverage that are available to policyholders. I don't know how prevalent that is in the industry, but I'd like to give you a chance to tell us about that.
I appreciate very much your familiarity with some of our insurance products. So we do have two optional coverages available right now that we price on a cost recovery basis. The intent being that we want as many Canadians, our members, to avail themselves of these optional coverages as possible. Essentially, the way that the Build Back Better provision works is if you were to encounter a loss as part of your claim settlement for no more cost to you as the policyholder or the member, that we would be able to a higher resilience standard. So if a significant event were to happen again, you'd be better protected. We have more broadly, beyond just Wawanesa Insurance now, there is an ongoing shift to within the insurance industry, and it's a necessary one, shifting from that protective, reactive posture to more of a preventative one. And that is a change, and that takes a lot of public education. In my view, it's very fair for Canadians if they were to say now, why do I need to be invested in these prevention efforts? You're their insurance company. You should be there for me. And that historically has been the absolute value proposition. And today it is. For any of our members who suffer a loss, we will be there for them. And that's why we're in business. As a mutual company, we take those responsibilities very seriously. Could uptake around these products be stronger? Yes. And I don't think we're alone as an insurer in having that experience. What you're seeing now is increasingly some insurers bundling some of these coverages into their base wordings, in other words, part of their core product suite. This is something that's evolving very quickly in real time. But here again, there's also risk that insurers are taking on disproportionate risk. And this is happening in the absence of a broader national conversation around these needs. So again, we'll try and do our part, but I think we need the federal government to join us.
Thank you. Something you said, could uptake be better? I think that that speaks to Mr. Stewart's point earlier that there's a pervasive feeling amongst individuals that while disasters happen, they're not going to happen to them personally, and so we tend to get. As individuals, we tend to be more reactive than proactive. I'd like to open this question to all of the witnesses. What have you learned about what? next round. Thank you.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 2,5 minutes.
Mr. Bonnet, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Mr. Bonnet, rather. Yes, I'm sorry. We've spoken a great deal about floods and flooding. I'd like to spend a few moments to propose the adoption of a motion that had previously tabled. That is the water report that we had begun. A study had been started at the 44th Parliament, and I do believe that my colleagues would be in agreement with quickly adopting this motion. This was sent to all as well as the clerk, and I think that we do have a consensus in order to adopt it.
Vous nous l'avez déjà envoyé en...
Would you like me to read it? Have you sent it in both languages? Yes. Pursuant to Section 102, the committee undertake a study on water without witnesses, and that these witnesses will be required to their first session of the 44th Parliament. Thus, this be made available to the members of the committee and will be taken into account by the members in the session. That the committee will therefore proceed with drafting a report. Mr. Saint-Pierre, I would like to know if we could take 2 minutes simply to have a quick discussion on this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for Monsieur Bonnet. You're wanting the analyst to do the report of the freshwater study based on all of the witnesses, like from the 44th sitting, and you're not suggesting that we introduce new testimony, correct?
Exactly, and we look at the report and we can have a discussion after if we think we want to do something else, but like we did for a finance report previously.
Perfect, thank you.
Asked the committee if we want to let the witnesses go, or do we intend to continue debate, questioning the witnesses after we finish the debate on the motion? So I would like to thank the witnesses for your presence, and you are now you're excused to go. Thank you again, and happy holidays.
Merci. Yeah, so noted that it's not my colleague Leslie this time around, so just recognizing your previous efforts. Peut-être une question à mon collègue. Est-ce que l'intention, ça serait
A question from my colleagues. Is the intent similar to the regarding the study that we conducted on climate change in January, February, that we come back with a complete analysis and we spend perhaps 1 or 2 sessions to review the studies, to bring amendments to it, and then we submit that study so that the chair can then table the report to the House? Is that your intent? In a perfect world, yes. If we were to proceed this way, if after reading the report, well, perhaps we can have further discussions and take further action, that's fine, but that would be the ideal path.
I think at least amongst my colleagues, we're happy to proceed to a vote.
I'll get to that, but before that, Mr. Leslie, would you share some comments?
Yeah, very similar. Just to clarify, so this is, the analysts have compiled everything already. It's been made available. Has it already been available to us? No. So it'll be a report similar to the financial impacts report shared with the committee. Ideally, one smooth in-camera committee business review of this, because it is from last Parliament. It's not to say it wasn't important. It was a lengthy study, so it might be tougher to get done in one meeting, but I would just hope that we could perhaps all have our amendments prepared and not be doing things on the fly, and maybe have a little, Mr. Chair, a little bit of heads up when this is coming so that we could have a little bit of leeway to have enough adequate time to review this, get the amendments that we want to see in order, and then so it's not a lot of back and forth, and just give the, we had a high number of witnesses did come for that study, and so we're okay with passing this motion so we get the report, get it tabled in this Parliament, but just don't want to dwell too many resources and too much time going back and forth, and certainly nothing new.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Monsieur Bonnet.
Exactement l'idée, chers collègues.
Well, exactly, that is the idea I had, dear colleagues. And this brings to mind another idea. So as a committee, will we have access to the briefs and the transcripts of the presentations that were delivered? Perhaps we already have access to these, but perhaps if we could have access to these, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll turn it over to the analyst or provide you with an answer, rather the clerk.
Oui, monsieur, tout témoignage est déjà...
Yes, all witness testimony is public. It is already on the website, including the briefs regarding the study. However, the reference documents and so on that belong to the committee but that have not yet been published and will be compiled, can be compiled and redistributed to all of the members.
Just like to add that I think it's to the credit of this committee that we are where work has been done in the previous Parliament. Witnesses have put in a lot of time and energy into providing us this information. I think that it's very good that we're not letting those that good work slide. So that's what we support.
Thank you, Mr. Fanjoy. Further debate? So all those in favor to Mr. Bonnet's motion? Against? Carried. Mr. Leslie?
Just, I know we're going to be wrapping up here soon. I would just like to put a notice, a motion on notice for the first available opportunity. The notice is as follows: that the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development reports to the House that, in the interest of restoring Canadian economic sovereignty, it recommends that the government immediately introduce a Canada Sovereignty Act that A, reestablishes Canada as a competitive resource-producing nation by repealing federal measures that block or penalize development, including the Impact Assessment Act, formerly Bill C-69, the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, formerly Bill C-48, the Federal Industrial Carbon Tax, the Oil and Gas Emissions Cap, the Federal Electric Vehicle Sales Mandate, the Federal Plastics Manufacturing Prohibitions, and federal regulatory restrictions that impede communication and advocacy by Canadian energy companies. B, rewards provinces, businesses, and workers who build and invest in Canada by introducing a Canada First reinvestment tax cut to spur domestic industrial activity, and providing free trade bonuses to provincial governments that remove internal trade barriers and fully open their markets to fellow Canadians. And C, protects Canadian innovation by requiring the Minister of Industry to present plans to Parliament to keep Canada's inventions, discoveries, and innovations from being sold off to other countries. I think this is a common sense motion that I look forward to debating and having our committee pass to refer back to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order. That's quite a long list, and I didn't hear one thing that related to our present study. So I just want to ask the chair: is this motion in order, or is it out of order?
Mr. Clerk, I'll let you respond. Thank you.
I had a moment to quickly read through it. Of course, it's not for me to determine whether it's in or out of order. That's for the chair. But just a procedural note that the usual practice is for the chair to rule on any question of procedural admissibility once the motion is moved. So Mr. Leslie has given oral notice of the motion. It will appear in the minutes until he moves it. Once he moves it, then points of order regarding the admissibility would be usually made. Thank you, sir.
So seeing that the clock is at 1:13, we shall adjourn. Wishing you all safe travels, happy holidays. Thank you, and Merry